This is the July 24th, 2019 Sustainability Regular Meeting.
I hereby call to order the July 24th, 2019 Sustainability Board meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. All right, the very first order of business today, we're going to have public comment. Okay, so let's open the floor for public comment. Each person will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. You must state your name, your city of residence, and what company you're with, if you're with the company. And you must stand at the podium. All right? Any public comment? Please.
My name is Linda Palmisano. I live at 509 West Amherst Circle in Satellite Beach. So I've been here before this board before. I see, hi Jennifer, my name is Linda. I haven't met you before, but I continue to present information to the City of Melbourne with my concerns about the chemicals they're using for water fluoridation. It's called hydrofluorosilicic acid. And Mr. Ralph Rigglesberger was kind enough to provide me with a certificate of analysis sheets, and these are just three from 3 shipments of the hydrofluorosilicic acid delivered to Melbourne in 2018. And there's many issues that I have. The fluoride itself, this chemical compound, has a lot of health issues, and I'm finding out daily just more and more. And I was at Melbourne last night presenting more information. But the way this is, hydrofluorosilicic acid comes about by the process of using what's called a wet scrubber in a smokestack at phosphate mining plants. And they did that because the fluoride emissions from the smokestacks, when they were allowed to just go into the air, were actually crippling the local cattle and wiping out citrus groves. So they made them contain the fluoride emissions, and they have this then slurry that comes out. It's called hydrofluorosilicic acid, but really that's only about 20. If you can see on here, the first line, the net, it says is 24, 23% or whatever. The rest is in really a contaminated aqueous base, a water base, because it's sprayed with water. And it's delivered unrefined, and it's put in our source waters after the waters have been filtered. The lake water, 2/3 of our water that we get comes from Lake Washington. That's filtered through a process called Actiflow, which does an excellent job removing turbidity and arsenic and heavy metals and things like that. 1/3 of our water that we get is from deep water wells, and that goes actually through a reverse osmosis process, and I want to comment on that too very quickly. But it's contaminated with lead and arsenic, as you can see, and it's put into the water after our source waters have been filtered, right before it hits the entry point into the distribution system. And the EPA has set a maximum contaminant level goal for both lead and arsenic as 0. So they're adding into our system these chemicals, and they're only testing for lead and arsenic. And independent testing that's been published shows that it's also typically contaminated with aluminum and other heavy metals. So at this point, there's no independent testing. So you're taking the word from the manufacturer that it has only this amount of arsenic and lead. And of course, arsenic's a known carcinogen, and lead has neurotoxic effects, especially in young children. So I just want to make this group aware that I'm continuing to present information. I appreciate any support. If anyone has an inclination to support this effort, I would greatly appreciate it. On the schematic on the back, this was also in the package. We had a January 24th meeting, and I know it's a little hard to read, but it shows again the water as it's processed out of Lake Washington and out of the deep water wells. And you will see, what I want to draw your attention to, and I think you're going to be speaking about the Indian River Lagoon, is the deep water well, I said, goes through a reverse osmosis process. And we've talked about that in here before, especially like at the sink level and stuff like that. But you get a lot of wastewater. So I've heard, you know, and you can correct me if I'm off on this, but about for every 1 gallon, let's say, on a sink that you get of RO water, you're losing 2 to 3 gallons in wastewater. In other words, the contaminant wastewater. But what the City of Melbourne does, and I'm sure it's all within EPA limits, but it may not be best practice, is the The contaminants that are removed as the process of reverse osmosis, it's down here on the, it's kind of hard to see right here, but it's treated with sulfuric acid. It goes through a deodorizer, and then it's put into the Ogallic River. So I have some concerns about that myself, but you all are going to be discussing that, I think. So anyway, that's what I have for you this evening. Does anybody have any questions?
How did the vote go on January 24th?
The vote was to continue adding the hydrofluorosilicic acid. But
And
like
do you
I
know what
said,
the vote was, the
6
count?
to 1. Mark LaRusso was the dissenting vote.
And was this information available on January 24th?
No, I didn't have this information for him, no.
You did not?
No, that came after. And I've actually, I've been presenting more information. That the gentleman that came that spoke for the Florida Dental Association, there's some issues with his presentation that I've actually taken to the state of Florida level, where I found statements he made are not accurate when compared to original source documents, published peer-reviewed research studies, and even statements by the CDC. So there's a review process going on there, and I've been instructed as of last night to individually contact the council members and speak to them about it, about some activity I've been having with the Florida Dental Association myself.
There's two handwritten numbers, densities, pounds per gallon. Is that the density of the material as they receive it or something else?
I would assume so. I mean, I don't know. This is the way that Mr. Rigelsberger sent it to me, so those are not my notes. Those were on the certificates of analysis when I received them.
Who's Mr. Realisberger?
He's the Director of Utilities and Public Works for the City of Melbourne. He's in charge of the water systems and utilities, the sewer systems, and all that. He's actually been quite professional and friendly to provide information. And he spoke about 20 minutes last night at the meeting because of the articles in the newspapers about, I assume, what I've heard, like an algae bloom or something in Lake Washington. People have been complaining. He said they had 72 complaints about, and I know I've saw it on Nextdoor.com and Satellite Beach and around. People say that the water has a bad odor to it, and some have cloudy. We have the RO system, so I don't have any complaints myself because we run everything through RO. All right, thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much. All right, is there any further public comment? No? All right, next order of business, I'd like to invite Courtney Baker up to the stage or the platform. She's going to talk to us about resiliency planning. Hello.
Is somebody going to move my slides for me? Sure. So thank you for having me. I heard that you all wanted to talk about resiliency, so I thought I would give you an update of what the city's doing. And I know, John Fergus has been part of our efforts for a really long time, well before I got here. And this is a presentation that I gave to Florida Planning and Zoning Association in Key West, and then also to the Jax Beach, Atlantic Beach, and Neptune Beach. The three mayors there had a forum on this issue, and we were invited to go speak about that, about our efforts there. And then also, the next week, we were invited to go down to Port St. Lucie. Their council and their county put together a forum, and they're starting their processes, and they had us down there as well to talk about our efforts and to get some advice on how to start. And, you all know where we live, so we don't need to go on this slide, so you can go ahead and change the slide. And this is what I kind of give to some of the, a lot of times we're presenting to city council members, to members of the audience, but I don't have to do this to planners. Most planners, that's not an arguable fact. But there's still some people who are very nervous about this topic. And when people are fearful, they tend to want to deny things, and that's, an issue that we still have to overcome. In some instances, it's gotten a lot less in the last, I would say, 5 years. I don't really encounter that much anymore, but we still get some. So you can go ahead and change that. And like I said, we've been doing this in our city for 10 years now. We started looking, it was actually in 2009 when the city wrote a grant and received a grant to do this analysis, and Randy Parkinson is the one who completed this report, and it was a simple bathtub analysis, a bathtub model, and so it wasn't a very complicated effort, but the report began the process for the city on creating adaptation action areas. You can switch the slide. And in basically starting the Sea Level Rise Subcommittee to the Comprehensive Planning Advisory Board that we had at the time. And shortly after that, the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity passed legislation that allowed communities to adopt adaptation action areas into their comprehensive plan, which is basically a designated area that would basically see the impacts of sea level rise and come up with policies and strategies on how to address the issues in those areas. And we adopted the first one we adopted was along the beach, and then after we did a lot more efforts into our flood zones, we adopted other areas. So then we began to do the adaptation action area policy in 2013. That's when I got here. We adopted that policy and then several others in our comprehensive plan. And then we began a Florida Department of Environmental Protection Coastal Community Partnership, Coastal Community Resiliency Grant in that year. And that grant was basically to do another vulnerability analysis, but with a lot more complicated modeling. And so you can go to the next one. And this project started, it was about a year. One of the great things about our area, or actually Florida, is we have regional planning councils, and those, our regional planning council is the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and they actually have taken a lot of the lead around the state in doing resiliency planning because they're kind of perfectly situated for that. It's a very regional issue, and they also kind of specialize in writing the grants. They know where the grants are, and they acted basically like our planning department and a planning consultant to us. So they spearheaded that project. We brought in FIT, as well as University of Florida, and members of Florida Sea Grant, an attorney, and another attorney, Aaron Beatty, helped us with coming up with policies that we're going to go through later. You can go ahead and change it. And we held a first public workshop in 2014, and we did a lot of effort to get people to this workshop, and it was actually pretty well attended for a climate change workshop, because you know that if you say you're going to put an electric plant in the middle of a city, you'll get like the whole city there, but if you do something about planning in the future, nobody shows up to the meeting, so it's hard to get people out to these meetings. But it was actually pretty well done, and we did get an article on NPR. I remember one of our police officers called me and said, I heard you on NPR. I'm so excited. We were at the city of Satellite Beach, made it on NPR. And I was like, okay, I can retire now, you know, I'm on NPR. So, but that was great. And the one good thing that got people out there was, you know, the flooding. And it's hard for people to want to do something about an issue that they haven't seen yet. It's hard. It's hard for people to want to plan for something they don't really see every day. It's easy down in South Florida because they have flooding in the middle of the day on a sunny day when they get a king tide or a high tide. We don't have that issue here, so we really get storm-related flooding and then also beach erosion, but that, you know, is basically it at this point. And most of the impacts that we have from climate change at this point is a rising water table and impacts to our utilities under the ground. So this is, you know, this was actually useful in getting people to come out to the meeting, because at this point we had to shut down Jackson's intersection because the river got so high it started backing up the outfall. And so the outfall at the end of Jackson, the water comes back in and starts flooding the street. So that's what happened here. Go ahead. And so this is the first tool that we used. It's the FDOT sketch planning tool. And so if you ask me the specifics of this modeling, I'm going to, like, my eyes will glaze over and I'll ask somebody else to come explain it to you. But we depend on people a lot smarter than us to do this stuff. So go ahead. Switch. And when we went to the Planning and Zoning Commission, we had a low, medium, and high curve rate when we started. And that, the staff was recommending a medium, you know, just let's base our policies on the medium because we didn't want to go too far and we were trying to be conservative because we have still some people out there going, oh, I don't know if this stuff's real, you know. Well, the Planning and Zoning Commission got there, when we got to the Planning and Zoning Commission, they voted to go for the high curve because they said, hey, you know, if we're going to talk, we're talking about planning for risks in the future, and every time we look at climate change again and do these analysis, it gets worse. So why would we plan for something less? So they wanted to adopt the high curve, and that's what I'm showing you today. That's what all of our policies are based on at this point. Go ahead. So this is 2070, and you can see most of the impacts are to the west side of the city, and this is really towards the river. And this is the lowest elevation of the city. And this is really along the east side of South Patrick Drive, and you'll see some of the policies that are coming down, or actions of the city council, and what staff is proposing will follow these, these issues. And you can see a lot of, even the canal front homes are pretty good, but it's that lower elevation on the east side of South Patrick Drive that really gets it early on. Go ahead to the next one. And then this is 2100. And, I tell people, we are going to do our best to try to engineer our way out of some of the impacts. But, just like, I grew up here and I'm not moving anytime soon. And like, I'm going to have like 6 feet of water in my living room before you kick me out of Satellite Beach. So, when we look at that, as I try to tell people, don't get too alarmed. We're going to try to do our best to try to work our way through this. Go ahead.
Is it fair to say we should interpret the blue as underwater?
That's correct. Yeah. Those slides are just sea level rise. It's not storm related. It's just the water coming up. So when we get to the next one, the next project, you'll see the storm related impacts. And then we also have erosion. And this is, the storm surge and erosion projections, which, for us is better than most areas because we do have a high dune system. And so, but we still have obviously a big erosion issue here. Beach renourishment is a big deal here. I think at this point we're doing a dune renourishment, I think every 2 years at this point now, it seems like, after every storm. So we're going to get the mid-reach project soon, and hopefully we'll be able to address some of those issues.
Courtney, can I ask a potentially dumb question?
Mhm.
Is the reason the edges are higher on the Atlantic side versus the lagoon is the violence, for lack of a better word, of the waves and stuff like that, whereas it's more of just a pure bath
Yes,
and water
that's
comes going in?
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Courtney, you might want to add where the blue is mean high water. That isn't all the time.
Yeah,
That's during the fall,
that's during
when the lagoon comes up about a foot. That's what you would see.
So we have a seasonal high water line here, and it's based, summer's lower, winter's higher, and so that is the highest of the year. So in some years, the rest of the year is not that bad, but again, we have to plan for the worst. So that's what that's what.
What it says is that on average, once a year, you're going to have several weeks of water in your house if you're in that area.
Unless, we do some things that we'll talk about in a little bit. Go ahead. And so these are some of the results of the public workshop, and you can see, some of the things, just like do nothing at all, belief in scientific hoaxes. There were some people there that were just, this is silly, why are we doing this? And this is back in 2013, so this has changed drastically. I don't really get this much anymore. And then, but you'll see where, move utilities underground, move your tax base from high hazard areas, beach restoration plan, and then, the lagoon is always an issue for a lot of people. And then also you'll see the maintain a healthy beach and dune system, and then solar energy. And so what I tell people when we go to public workshops is when you have input from the public like this, it's very important that you follow through with their suggestions, because otherwise what's the point of having these workshops? And you see some of the efforts that you all have done, it kind of match that. I mean, the solar energy, focusing on renewables, and I'm going to go through some of the other results from our survey. Go ahead. So this is a survey that we did with this project, and this was one of the major components of this project, and it was a web-based survey, and I think a lot of you took it if you were here, and you can go ahead to the next slide. And it used that public workshop and created the strategies, and we asked people to rate them, what's the most important to you. So you see redirect development, beach renourishment, dune protection, armoring, things like that. So go to the next one. So we had 479 validated respondents, and we took about 3 months to get that input through, and we we had the little iPads out at Ocean Beach Festival, and we had, you know, we put it through Facebook. And to give you a comparison, Cape Canaveral just did this, and they had half the amount, so I'm just saying, we had better. So, and I think we're pretty much the same size cities about, so, go ahead. And these are the top 10 strategies that came out of that, and moving pole mountain utilities under the ground. And, you know, some of these, when we say feasibility, that's important because FPL has done a lot of these studies already. They did them, you know, 15 years ago when they weren't cool because they have to. They own infrastructure everywhere. And, you know, part of the reason why they push back on underground utilities, particularly in South Patrick Drive, is those maps that I just showed you. The water table's too high, and they don't want to do that because they can't get to the utilities until the water recedes, and if something happens. And so people would be without power while, you know, because they can't get to the utilities. So they're only interested in doing those things up by A1A, and you'll see, you know, some of the efforts in getting some of that done. And can you go back for a minute? We also have, you know, coastal vegetation with sea oats, install larger drainage pipe and structures, and we did our stormwater master plan, you know, so we'll go through some of that. So you see, we really just picked off increased construction setbacks from the coastline. We picked off all of these, and we have been, you know, progressively going through them and completing them. Go ahead. So this is the larger project, Florida Sea Grant, and this is about a $300,000 project. We did not obviously pay for that. We got a Florida Sea Grant, and that grant was managed by Stetson University and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, as well as Florida Sea Grant. And they did the HAZUS modeling of the city. So that's like basically taking sea level rise in a storm and modeling that. And that's what we basically, you'll see the maps in a minute. And then we also mapped all of our critical infrastructure. So all of our stormwater lines under the ground, all of our city facilities, and we wanted to make sure that we knew the elevations, and we wanted to know basically where our stormwater systems were lying in the water table, because if they're sitting in the water table, they're not moving much water. So we wanted to make sure we knew how that was working. And go ahead. And so this is what the one on the left shows the FEMA flood maps, and the one on the right shows an actual inundation flood map with a 100-year flood, with a 100-year storm. And that's a 2040. So this is what we have to plan for when we're looking at a pretty good storm. Okay, go to the next one. And then we also looked at where, for the city itself, where do we, you know, can you go back? That slide always does, I don't know why, but we looked at, you know, when you're a city manager and you see those stars and those little blue areas, and you're like, man, why does that happen to me? You know, why can't I have it in the high ground? So we were getting ready to look at Public Works and redo their building in its place, but because Public Works is literally condemnable. I mean, we can condemn it tomorrow. And so we, when Irma happened, they did flood, and areas near the fire station, it was hard for their fire trucks to get out because of the street flooding. And so we looked at, we also need to add another floor to the fire station. And when you do stuff like that, you want your public, like in the public sector, when we touch a building and redo it, it's going to be like that for 50 years. So, and a new building is going to be there for 100 years. So we want to make sure that we build there for last. And the last thing we want to do is build a whole new structure and then 20 years later have to move it. It's just not good planning. So we ended up buying a property along Jackson Avenue, right next to the dentist office. That property is ours now, and we are planning to build the public works station later this year, and the fire station in about 5 years. And we had Stetson University do those elevation analysis for us to make sure that we were correct in our initial fear that we would be building in a bad flood zone, and they confirmed that for us and presented that data to council, and the council made the decision to buy the property up by A1A. Okay. Then we also updated our stormwater master plan using sea level rise in the modeling, and that was an interesting process because our engineer did have to change their modeling, and so we kind of had to wait for that. But we ended up getting those projects back, and the council, to pay for that, they literally doubled our stormwater fee from $104 per equivalent residential unit per year to $204 per ERU, and that you see the results of that action because you see our stormwater projects primarily happening really near time right now in DeSoto, that those areas, we're doing massive pipe replacements. And I wish I had the picture, well, the pipes that we're pulling out look just like that. And, you know, that not only is infrastructure failure, so you see, so some of the areas of the city that are not in a low elevation, when you see the flooding, it's primarily infrastructure failure. So some people are like, oh my God, you know, it's climate change. I'm like, no, it's because the pipes are bad. You know? So we have to make sure that we differentiate between those. Go ahead. And then we also looked at, you know, we have the city's infrastructure, but we also have development, and, you know, how do we look at strengthening our code to be a little bit more resilient. And so we started working with the Climate Ambassador team, and I got that idea from Key West, and they did the same thing when they went through their, you know, pretty massive changes, because Key West, you know, obviously they have a different situation than us, but they needed to start stilting their buildings, and that changed a lot of codes, and they needed to work through that because a lot of their resources there are historic, and there's a lot of character concerns there, just like any community. I mean, we have the same concerns here. So they created this Climate Ambassador team to start working through that, and that's exactly what we started to do. And I think some of you served on that, and we kind of talked through some of the major things that we needed to focus on. And so we did, you know, we advertised those meetings, we recorded them, they're on our website, you know, so if you want to go back and look at them for some reason, because they are interesting, you can watch that. And the first thing we did was we increased the construction setbacks for beachfront property by 15 feet. And that is a big deal for council to do that, because that did impact the ability for some property owners to redevelop their property. We did decrease their front setback by 15 feet as well. So we just kind of shifted it. But some of the problems with that is, you know, some of the people who, we did get a challenge, a legal challenge on this. The Coastal Construction Control Line, which is developed by DEP, that used to be our setback, and then we increased it by 15 feet. Well, so that Coastal Construction Control Line, for many of the properties in the city of Satellite Beach, run right through the middle of these people's houses. So, you know, when you move that up this way, they aren't going to develop their property as much as they thought they would. So we did go through a challenge. When we sent in the data that showed that we basically lost a significant amount of beachfront in the last 20 years, they ended up dismissing the case. And now we are going through meetings with the community to talk about basically two areas of the community, and that is the west side of A1A, the commercial properties along A1A. A lot of them have no stormwater. And so when you have that much asphalt sheeting down into the city, that creates more flooding issues for everyone that's, you know, at a lower elevation than them. And so part of being able to control flooding is to be able to control stormwater where it starts. And so we're trying to get these commercial property owners to redevelop. And so we're looking at trying to provide incentives with height and density to get them to do that. And that's very controversial, because anytime you say height, and especially in the beach area, people lose their, you know, and then also density. And I'm going to go through some of the reasons why we want to do that. Go ahead. So this is the exact same slide I'm showing community members right now, and this is ABC Liquor, and everybody knows where that is. And I joke around, like, don't lie, you know, everybody here knows where that is. And so what, you know, what do you think? One thing you notice about this property is here's your stormwater in 3 areas right here, and then they have all the parking they need. And the amount of the building takes 15% of the site. So remember that. Okay, go to the next one. This is a property that has not been developed with current codes. And this is Dave Allison's property. He just renovated it. Here's DeKine's. This is on Cinnamon. So you see there's just no stormwater. And what else don't they have?
Landscaping.
Yeah, trees. There's no tree anywhere. No setbacks. Building goes right up to the property line. and that building takes up 37% of the site. So if you were this property owner, would you tear down a building that takes up 37% of the site and build one in the back that takes up 19% of the site?
Got the money.
Of course not. So you just wouldn't do that. So that's why, unless you allow them to go up and give them some other income stream, they're just not going to do it. And they're not. They're renovating them, and that's exactly what he did. Okay, go ahead. And so I get this a lot. We're going to be at Fort Lauderdale, and I'm like, no, this is Fort Lauderdale. We're not going to be Fort Lauderdale. So we're going to be this. Go to the next one. So this property is 42 feet. Our height limitation for commercial property in the city of Satellite Beach is 35 feet. This property was redeveloped after a fire prior to our charter amendment, and they got a variance to go up to 42 feet. And this is what we're talking about. This is the kind of development that we're talking about. So we're wanting to raise the height by 10 feet, but only if they comply with stormwater, okay? So that's the proposal that we're hoping to put towards the voters. I'm still getting, last night I got some good feedback from some of the residents that are valid concerns that we're going to go look at this week and see what we can, do to address those. And that's why we're having the meetings that we're having now, and then we'll design the proposal and bring it to council at that point. But this is the reason, is we want stormwater and parking under the building and allow them to do this. And what do you have to do when you do this? You have to comply with ADA, right? And what does that mean? Elevators, exactly. And how much are elevators? $150,000 to $250,000. So the one that Lungs RX put in was $250,000 just recently. So when you have an expense like that, you have to give them something to deal with that. Okay, go to the next one.
Courtney, what
Yes,
were
ma'am.
some of the concerns from last night?
Some of the concerns is, if you have most of the structures along A1A are not 35 feet, okay? Most of them are about 25, some of them maybe 30, because commercial buildings are much taller than the floor is usually 15 to 20 feet, the first floor. So when you have a property that's behind them, and it's a second story, and they can see the ocean, and that changes, so we have to figure something about that out, because we don't want to reduce the property values of the people behind us, so that's something that, and even though they may even be able to do that under 35 feet, it's still, we don't want to facilitate that, you know what I mean? So we want to make sure that we address some of those issues first. Okay, and then, so this is what I also tell people, this is the normal process for code, land use and development approvals, and basically we usually start with the comprehensive plan and we create the policies in the land use district, and then we create the zoning that goes along with that, and then we apply it to the properties. And once you get here, all of these are really just like almost rote approvals. So you may have, most of these are administrative, by the way, and you may have you have to do plats by the city council, but they're publicly advertised meetings, quasi-judicial, but there's very little changes. If they're meeting their zoning requirements, the city council can't really say no, and if they do, they usually go to court and lose. So what I tell people is, we want to do this, this is the best time to participate, right here, these two processes. And this is what we're doing right now, is we're getting people to participate before we go into these processes, so we get their opinions prior to getting here. And unfortunately, a lot of governments just start, they do all this without going to the public first, and then, so that people come out to participate, and it's already done. And that's unfortunate. So we want to be here and not here. Go ahead. We are also looking at a policy, council's going to hear a comprehensive plan policy on how to address roads that are consistently flooded in the future. Because, when you have, let's say you have a road that 3 houses are on, are you really going to raise that? I mean, do you have enough tax base there to support something that expensive? Or, can they do that with an assessment? So those are some of the issues that we need to talk through. And we want to have those expectations on the books prior to these things happening, because then people understand it and you're not rushing around after it happens to try to figure out how to solve the problem. And John has a really good background here. He helped us with that a lot. And then right now we're looking at an affidavit. I'm still trying to get our attorney to review this, but we're wanting, when you have a property in a flood zone, which have expanded this year, the FEMA flood zones have, but, you know, we all know that there's flood zones outside of the FEMA flood zones. They never match. 67% of our flood policyholders in the city of Satellite Beach are outside of FEMA flood zones, so they know that they flood, and they carry flood insurance for that reason. So when we have our adaptation action areas and people are getting ready to build something that, you know, is more than just a house renovation, then we will be asking them to sign an affidavit, understanding that they're doing this in a flood zone. So they understand that, and they're being told that. And this is the reason why we do these things, is because in St. Augustine, St. Johns County, they lost a case, and because they gave building permits in an area that was eroding rapidly, and they lost that case. So government is in like a really bad situation, and you never know what the courts are going to do. So it's either, you know, you get yelled at for not giving the building permit because of property rights, and then if, you know, you get yelled at for giving the permit in a flood zone, you know, so it's really hard when it's not a good, solid case law out there. Then we're really in a rock and a hard place sometimes, and we just have to kind of do what we think is right and hope that, you know, we withstand the legal challenges. Can you go back one? We are also, again, doing a lot right now to create building standards that allow property owners to protect their property, to allow them to still, if they want to redevelop, to take away the requirement for a garage, an attached garage, if they want to do a washout first floor. You know, so those are some of the things that we're working on right now that do not need to go to the voters, that will just go straight to council.
Quick.
Yes, sir.
This is this is curiosity. We have obviously a lot of our homes in Satellite are built between 60 and 64, or somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet. You know, mid-century modern houses. Do you have any idea in 2019 dollars what the cost would be to do just that, to lift and have a washout first floor on that type of a home?
Yeah, so I know in Key West, there's concrete block foundation, you know, just slab foundation homes, all in, there's a lot in Key West as well. And they have some people actually raising those, you know, literally. And they said it's about a $20,000 cost for them, but it's very expensive down there because they have, you know, any construction down there is hard because you have to bring it down there. I know there's one happening right now in Crooked Beach. But I can try to get that information for you. But you can see it if you're driving down the road. If you just, you know, if like how somebody else drives, you can just look, and it's in between the two, you know, the two roads, and you can see a concrete block house being raised right there. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, 20,000 is that?
That's a Key West number.
Yeah.
That
How
I
much
got.
elevation are you getting for 20 grand?
I don't know. But up there, they're elevating, 10, 15 feet, because that's their storm surge. So, like, for example, here, you could probably, in most of the residential areas off the beach, you know, get away with, at least now, you know, raising it 3-4 feet and not having to do it all the way up there. But up there, that's their height if you go down there.
I just had a thought. I don't know if it's been talked about, but what could you make out of our existing homes now? Could you make our first floors a washout zone and then pop the top? Is that possible?
I don't know, because I'm not a builder, but John could probably answer that, but I don't see why not.
I'm wondering if we can maybe
Yeah.
put larger windows on one end or another, creating a washout.
It
first
has
floor
to
and then
meet a
pop.
breakout, like certain parameters, so that when it's washed out, it stays where it's at, and it doesn't hurt the next door. So that's a parameter that they have. So I'd have to ask him about that, but that's a good question, because that would make it feasible.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a lot of people doing second stories now. I mean, when I first moved into, on Wilson, there was nobody on my street that had second floors, and now I think there's like at least 4.
So maybe if somebody's going to do a second floor, they need to make their first floor a
Right.
washout before doing that.
And you probably won't see people very interested in doing that until they see a good storm.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That's how people are. But I'm hoping that, we don't think that we need to change the height in the residential areas at this point, because 35 feet is plenty to do, you know, what people need to do. What we're looking at is the commercial area, because if we can't get them to do stormwater, you know, it has not only resiliency implications, but also lagoon implications, because we need to treat that water before it goes into the lagoon. And when we, when we don't see them doing it, then that's when we have to start buying property for us to do it. And, we don't want to pay for that. I mean, I can tell you, right now, we bought property on the end of Jackson that surrounds that yellow with green shutter office building, and that property was $565,000. And we don't have any more vacant land, really, so we'd have to buy, like, houses, and that's not, it would be a nightmare. So we really want to focus on getting these commercial property owners to start redeveloping and putting their stormwater in.
What if we bought those properties and put affordable housing there?
Well, part of that idea is, in most of the commercial properties in the city allow a 7-unit per acre mixed-use component to it. So you can add 7 units to your commercial building if you wanted to. The property along South Patrick Drive and all of those flood zones, nobody has really ever done that. Nobody's used the commercial mixed use ever. And so we're proposing to reduce that in the South Patrick area and shift that density to the A1A area. And so that would give the incentive to the A1A property owners to do that. And that would replace some of the lost affordable housing. Every time, the old surf housing up at Old Peg Legs is gone, we keep losing these little duplexes for these houses. So that's the idea, because I don't know if anybody, I just sold my house and I'm renting right now until I get into my other house, and it was harder to rent than to get a mortgage. And it's very expensive, incredibly expensive over here. And so if we ever want our kids to move out, which, would be nice if mine, eventually would, we need to provide something,
Well, if we want our kids to stay in town.
Right, exactly. Even, in going over the bridge, we all, like, it's horrible. I mean, nobody wants to go over the bridge, and we want to keep our population. That's the other issue. So if we don't maintain our population over time, we will lose our commercial businesses, and we will have to go to the bridge. And that is unsustainable in itself. So, so we don't want to increase density than what's already on the books. What we want to do is shift it into where it's higher ground, basically. So that's part of the proposal that we're presenting to the community. You can go to the next one. And then I brag about you guys all the time. So I talk about what an awesome job you guys are doing. And this is, if you didn't know, you're being modeled all over the state of Florida, by the way. And people are asking, I probably give out your plan to, maybe, constantly. And I know Julie emails it out to localities that call and say, hey, can we get a copy of your plan? Or, hey, how'd you guys do this? And we get invited to speak about, how we created this board all the time and all of the activities you're doing. So it's a really popular program that is being, mimicked across the state. And I tried to end with this. This is a hard conversation for people to have. Climate change has a lot to do with emissions, and emissions have a lot to do with land use patterns. And urban sprawl is one of the problems with this, and the lack of being able to have public transportation. You can't have public transportation in areas that are this spread out. So that's one of the issues, and the impact on utilities, the impact on municipal budgets, not being able to maintain this type of development is debt service for the next generation, because the taxes generated by this development does not pay for the maintenance of those neighborhoods. And so when you see the stuff going out in Palm Bay, they're going to have a hard road when they get, 20 years from now, when they have to repave those roads. Go ahead. And this is a study that was done by UC Berkeley, and they basically did a model of carbon footprints based on energy use and transportation and things like that, and they created this mapping system, which is really cool. Go ahead to the next one. And this kind of shows you how downtowns that are walkable, more dense, have a less carbon footprint than suburbs. Go ahead to the next one. This is Atlanta. You see the little green area? That's downtown. Go to the next one. There's Houston. Even in Houston, that's their downtown,
No zoning, just choice.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just development patterns.
Yeah.
This is our Satellite Beach, Florida. Houston's better. Can you believe it? Like, it makes me want to cry. So, and it's because we just don't have a lot of public transportation. Go to the next one. And you see the categories. Transportation's in the blue. Housing is basically electricity use. And I can't read that much, that far. But you see what I'm going. And food, basically distribution. So if you have to cart in food from a long ways, that factors into that. And this is Orlando. This is downtown Orlando, 29.3. Now go to the next one. This is Windermere, which is literally right over, kind of next door, but it's a big suburban development, and you see the transportation skyrocket and as well as the housing, and that's 69.3. You can go to the next one. And then I did this for Jacksonville, just so you can see their downtown. That's their downtown. Go to the next one. And then that's a suburb right next to downtown. So you can see how land use patterns have have a lot of implications on climate change. And so when you hear that, we need to have less dense development, I cringe, because, that the worst thing, and you ask a stormwater manager, like the worst thing in St. Johns River Water Management District, anyone who works from there, what is the worst land use pattern for our waterways? And they'll say, these 10-acre ranches that people are buying right now with these large pets, and they think that they're farmers now, and they don't know how to take care of the waste, and it washes down their, swales, and it goes into the rivers, and that's the worst. So these are some of the things that, sometimes people think that's more sustainable development. In reality, it's really not. So, so that's kind of the little lecture I give to people. This is, development patterns have a profound effect on climate emissions, and, less density is not necessarily better. And I'm not talking about when you're looking at character. Okay, New York is, yes, that's New York, but you don't have to have New York to have a pattern of development that promotes walking and service delivery in one area. And Satellite Beach has that. We do have that. And I think we're getting better at walking and, things like that, but we still have to use our car to go to major areas because we don't have public transportation. So if we were able to get that done, increase the public transportation options through the county and people started using them, we would see that score go down quite a bit. So we're not talking, when I say, we need to have a more compact, that's a better way to say it, is more compact development. You don't have to do Fort Lauderdale, that's definitely not what I'm saying. You just have to be mindful of, scooching it in, clustering it, and not just, tearing down every tree and, making these, cookie cutter homes down, because that's what's happening. And during, when we do that, what do we fill in? We fill in the wetlands, and that's our flood control, our statewide flood control. And when we get rid of those, we have worse problems. Okay? Go ahead. And so I think that's more of the same, but these are some of the, things we try to get people to do. And luckily, the East Coast is really jumping on board and getting a lot of this done. And we just signed a regional climate compact with the cities that have signed on are Indian Harbor Beach, Titusville, and Orlando. So we're starting to get that organization together, and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council is really, kind of heading that up. And Orlando is the other partner. And when we did that compact, it was really us in Orlando that put that together with the Regional Planning Council. And so, they see us as the leaders on the small side, and Orlando the leaders on the big side. So that's kind of neat that we have that. So I think that's it.
So we are part of the compact.
Yep. Council voted on that last month, and I think they're going to be submitting their first grant to start the organization and the planning piece of it. So.
Is this kind of modeled in South Florida?
Yes and no. South Florida did not use their regional planning council as the organizational crutch. So we thought that would be a better idea for our area. And I think, most of the cities in the counties in the compact agree with that because, they just really have been the leaders in creating all of this.
Now, I may be unfairly characterizing South Florida, but it appears they're focused on engineering solutions.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Is this one moving in a different direction, maybe?
I don't
Policy
know.
than-
So I think, when we put together the construct for the plan, it went from, health and safety to, food delivery, so it was very broad. But you have to understand that the economies are a lot different. So South Florida has the money to raise their roads and do massive seawall. I mean, we went to the Florida Inland Navigation District presentations because we were asking for, I think we were asking for like $5,000 for a pontoon boat or for a kayak launch. And Miami was there, grant after grant after grant for seawalls, $500,000, $500,000, $475,000. So it's a different level, and they have a different economy and a bit different tax base to be able to pay for stuff like that. We just don't have that here.
Well, that's why I was
Yeah.
suggesting you might want to move more on the policy side.
Yeah, I mean, you have that mix, like we still have stormwater. I mean, we're going to, make the pipes bigger and, maybe look at some pumping if we need to and some of the outfalls. I mean, so those are engineering solutions that are still there that, would be applicable. But raising roads, I don't see that in our future. I have to be honest,
I'm wondering about the regional compacting. The thing that I always think about Satellite Beach is that, I mean, it really could be like Florida's bike city or, so, and there's been a lot of recent transportation, focus groups and getting input and things like that across the region. And I'm just wondering about the regional compact and how that overlays with those kinds of conversations in terms of bike and pedestrian and how that really is kind of a proxy lead-in to this kind of development that's more compact. So are those kinds of conversations, I mean, part of it is behavior change and sort of lifestyle change, and part of it's also planning for, bike accessibility, but also the connectedness of it. It doesn't work if it's not connected to Indian Harbor Beach or connected to. So are those part of the conversations? Do you have any
definitely.
details?
It's
Yeah.
not only from, when we talked about it at the compact, it was, with bike and pedestrian and was primarily linked towards not only alternative transportation, but also health. And so that's definitely a big conversation. And then, when you're looking at bike communities and, areas with large pedestrian usage, you also you have to make sure your, air quality's good, so it's those interlinks. But yes, that's all been discussed. And they're definitely part of that conversation. Definitely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the priority would be not necessarily to increase the population of Satellite Beach, but to take what currently exists and shift it east.
That's correct.
What percentage or what number of people are you hoping by, 2070, 2040, to have shifted east?
Right now, we're shifting paper units, like basically development rights that exist, and that would be shifting, it's about 200 units. So to give you an idea of what that would look like, that's like Oceana is 200 units, so that would be the same units just spread across, the west side of A1A properties, commercial properties. And that's if they choose to develop it, because it's all, and, whether or not the property owner decides to do it or not. So we're basically preserving the amount of units that are allowed in Satellite Beach, but shifting them over to a different area. Because we're very nervous about approving building permits for new residential units in those flood areas. But, and then also just to, like the canal owners, we don't have to shift canal owners because they're not impacted. Like, if you look at those maps, they're impacted in 2100, but so is half the city. So that's the other issue, is it's really those commercial properties along South Patrick Drive that are really the ones that are impacted.
You talked about the limitations from a fiscal standpoint of engineering solutions and the smaller community and so forth, but I asked this question about raising the house, but it seems like, and I know it's more of a medium term and a Band-Aid as opposed to fixing, emissions, but there's so much that's beyond our control with,
Right.
China and India and for other, but if it's a number that's feasible, given, your taxable or fair market value of a lot of these houses here, it would seem like it would be, because, if people have a house that is being constantly flooded and, they're literally underwater and are going to walk away, the banks have a reason to want to finance people
Right.
renting those houses because it allows them to stay there and potentially sell it. So I guess in my mind, that gives me some hope. We're looking at least like 2040, 2070 time period on that map, how we could have an engineering improvement at least, even if there's things happening that are beyond our control. Do you understand what
Yeah,
I'm
oh,
saying?
yeah. Yeah, so, and that's the other thing too is, the city's never gonna, I don't think have to deny anything because the banking and financial industry will do it first. So already there's denials happening for mortgage insurance on the beaches in St. Johns County. So, we'll never have to do that, I don't think. That's done by the private sector will be ahead of us in that regard. But when you have a property, in the middle of the city that you are trying to protect from a storm, you may be in that blue area and you're trying to make sure you're going to be okay later, that's your insurance and things like that, or think that's great. You're doing the stuff that insurance companies love, and so I don't see a problem with any of that. I think that'll praise out.
Okay. All right. Any further public comment?
All right.
No? Courtney,
Thank you.
before you go, is there anything else that we can do as a board to help out with this cause? I know we're doing things already, but is there anything that's come to mind that we could do to help?
Well, I think on the 21st, August 21st at 5 o'clock, the council's having a workshop with the Florida Sea Grant team. They're going to be coming to present the policies, and a lot of those I've talked about, but very broad, some of the policies are pretty specific, and they're going to be presenting all that. And if you all could make that meeting, that would be great. I think it's important for you all to be part of that. And then as we move down the line of, strategies and stuff like that, we'll be glad to be in front of you to present those to you and get your comments.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
All right, for the next order of business, we have a presentation from Brennan Smith from Brevard County, an update on the Save Our Lagoon program, or plan.
All right, so I'm with the Brevard County Save Our Indian River Lagoon program. For those who aren't aware of it, I'm sure most everyone is, but that's the half-cent sales tax we all passed in 2016. I'm one of the team members who's responsible for helping to move the projects forward in that plan. And just want to give you guys a brief overview of what's going on with the plan and sort of some ideas for the future too. But a lot of people, come to us and say, well, we know what the problem is with the lagoon. And they always have this one thing that they say, if you fix that, it's going to be fine. And as we know, though, there's not just one thing that's an issue in the lagoon. There's no one magic bullet that we can do to fix it. There's all these different inputs that we have to deal with. And the issues in the lagoon has been sort of a death by 1,000 cuts. So with the Save Our Indian River Lagoon plan, we tried to see how many of those issues we'd be able to address. And we looked at what the inputs were. If you look at the historical loading in the lagoon, you'll see on the left there, that's the point source pollution. This is back in the 80s and 90s. And at that time, most of that came from discharges from the wastewater treatment plants. They were discharging directly into places like Crane Creek and into the lagoon. So a lot of the nutrient loading in the lagoon came from that.
Okay. So they were Untreated sewage was going into Crane Creek?
No, it was treated.
Okay.
But even with treated sewage, there's still a level of nitrogen and phosphorus in it that,
Okay.
yeah, goes out there. So we also, stormwater was a big thing. We had muck back then as well, too. Our septic wasn't as big. We didn't have as much development. But when we see the changes here, you'll see in 1990s, the early 90s, they had passed the Indian River Lagoon Act, which prohibited, one of the things it did was prohibit the discharges of those wastewater treatment plants effluent directly into the lagoon. So that caused our point source pollution to be the largest contributor, actually went down to about 2% of the nutrient input now that we can identify as point source. And then you'll see septic went up with more development, same with some of the groundwater influences. Atmospheric actually went down with some of the Clean Air Act laws that went into place, so cleaned up some of the nitrogen that would come from emissions and would get into the lagoon. And since the 90s, that Indian River Lagoon Act also implemented a lot of stormwater restrictions, and so we've been doing better at stormwater development, and we've been trying to retrofit some of these older systems, and we've seen that go down. But our muck with more development has gone up. So we knew we needed to address these different things, and some of them we could. Some of them, like the clean air, that is more of a federal issue, so there's not as much we can do, at least through regulations, to deal with that.
On the muck,
Yes.
is it safe to say that it's pretty much what's there is there, we're not getting that much now, or?
No, it's still being produced. So that's the thing with muck. We can remove it, and if we don't improve our practices upland with managing our, grass clippings, yard waste, things like that, we're going to contribute more to muck. Now, through these stormwater improvements we've done, we see a slower accumulation than we did previously. So without any stormwater improvements in place, everything would just flow directly in. Now we have retention ponds that will settle some of that out, and other things like our baffle boxes that will trap some of that muck producing material. So with these improvements, we'll see slower accumulation, but I don't know that we'll ever be free of muck, because not all of it is from us either. There is some that comes from the natural environment, just leaves from trees that hang over waterways, the algae in the lagoon itself, seagrass, any plant material that decomposes can contribute to muck. So we knew we could address some certain things, and the initial plan started off with the ones you see at the top here. So fertilizer, reclaimed water, septic systems, stormwater, and muck flux. And our plan is an adaptive plan. So as we learn more things through some of the research we do, or get feedback from different areas, we realize we have to address different things. So after the hurricanes, we heard a lot of feedback from the public about the stormwater or the sewage discharges that happened. And so there was more focus on sewage, and with that we started looking into things like the leaking laterals. I know you guys did smoke testing here in Satellite as one of our pilot projects to look and see how much of an issue that was. Now, you guys didn't have too much of an issue because you had done some improvements before, but we're looking at some other areas too to see how they compare. And so we've added in repairing things like our leaking laterals, which is the line that runs from the house to the main line in the street, and that's usually the homeowner's responsibility. So oftentimes they don't know there's any issue there until something like smoke testing is done, or until they have a backup in their home. And then they find out that that lateral line is damaged and needs to be replaced. So with this, we're encouraging inspections of these lateral lines and hopefully giving homeowners money that they can replace them if they are hesitant to do that on their own. Grass clippings is one of the things we also added in. We know that's an issue with people, either blowing, I see it, I saw it 3 times last week, people blowing grass clippings out into the street, so it just flows down the storm drains, or people along canals mowing and letting it go into the canal. One of our researchers took a video of this guy, just took a big clump of yard debris and just threw it right into the canal. So some people don't realize that that's a problem, and they think, oh, it's just natural, it'll just go away. but we need to educate the public on that. So that's been added in there. And last year, we also added in package plants, which are what are seen oftentimes in mobile home parks. They're sort of mini wastewater treatment plants. And a good example is one down at Long Point Park. So they have the campgrounds there, and the bathrooms in the campgrounds go to this mini plant on the grounds there. It does some treatment, but not to the point that a traditional wastewater treatment plant would. It goes out into a little pond that has some UV treatment as well, and then the nutrients from that go out into the system. So it works sort of like a septic system in that way, that we're putting a lot more nutrients out than we would with a traditional sewer system. So we're looking at addressing some of these mobile home parks and other areas that are using package plants to upgrade them, or if we can, remove them off of those. Now, I hear all the time, you guys haven't done anything yet, or what's been done? And we have 16 different projects that have been completed since the inception of the plan. Now, we have a lot more that are underway, though, and that's what people don't realize. They want to see everything done right away, and we can't do that. Things take time. There's permits, there's design, and construction can take, in some cases, several years. So, we are glad to have finished as much as we have so far, and it runs the gamut of different things. So we have some of the restoration projects, like our living shorelines, oyster reefs. We have stormwater projects in there. There's been 2 muck projects that have been completed. So we have a variety of different things that have been completed in the plan. And here's just a little overview of some of them. So we've done a couple septic to sewer conversions already, one in Rockledge at Bree Swept, and then the Merritt Island one there. We've done stormwater improvements in Palm Bay and in Gleason Park and Indian Harbor Beach, Church Street in Cocoa, downtown Cocoa Village, put in a baffle box, as well as some up in Cape Canaveral, and we have some going up in Titusville right now. And here's that package plant in Long Point I was telling you about. So this is a denitrification barrier. That's one of the things we can do to help with that, is just dig a trench. They put in a denitrification material, what they call BAM. It's bioabsorptive activated media is the long term for it, but BAM for short. And what it is, it works similar to, like, if you went to an aquarium before and you have your filter in there. It's an area where beneficial bacteria can grow, and as the water moves through there, it can remove the nitrogen and phosphorus as the water moves through. So by lining these ponds with that, as the water, high nutrient water exits that, it flows through that system, and you get additional removal. And depending on the BAM fields, it can be around 60% removal of the excess nutrients. And then on the right here, that's those baffle boxes that are actually down in the storm drains. They capture that leaf material, the leaves, grass clippings, and trash, and keep it from decomposing. So that helps reduce the nutrients that are heading out into the lagoon as well. As I mentioned, we completed 2 different muck projects. One was one that was in the plan initially. The other one, the Turkey Creek one, was an emergency one that was added later. We had just finished a state-funded dredge project at Turkey Creek, and then Hurricane Matthew came along and pushed a bunch of muck that we couldn't get to through that dredging, because we have to stay a certain distance, about 10 feet away from any structures like docks and shorelines. So the stuff that was sitting up underneath docks got pushed back out. We had a smaller bit of muck that was pushed down, but we had to put up some funds for FEMA to reimburse us, and we do 12.5%. So that's where that $215,000 came from, was that 12.5% match for FEMA, and we knew we'd be able to get that reimbursed back. And we also are doing some restore. So we're reducing nutrients through those stormwater and other projects. We're removing legacy load of nutrients through that muck. And then we are restoring some of the natural filtration out in the lagoon. And by the end of this, we hope to have enough oysters out in the lagoon that it will be able to filter the volume of the lagoon in 1 year. So there's a lot of different projects scattered all around the county that have been completed, and these are the fastest to get permitted and done. That's why you see a lot more of those than you do some of the other ones. And then we also are trying to respond to different things. So we do research to make sure that things we're doing are effective or to plan things the best way. So this, you'll see them probing muck. So before we go out and dredge the muck, we have to ground truth it, make sure that we're removing only the muck from the areas and not natural riverbed. And we found through this that there was actually less muck out there than we thought. We did find out, however, that the nutrients in it were a lot higher than we expected. So even though there's less, there's actually a similar amount of nutrients coming out of that muck because the concentrations are that much higher. And we have groundwater monitoring that's also going on all throughout our project areas to make sure that these projects are performing to the way that we hope to. Now, we have 9 different projects that are under construction currently, and some of them will hopefully be finishing up soon. A few of the Titusville Baffle Box ones, I hope to see some of those finishing up this quarter or next by the end of the year here. And then some are just getting underway. Some of the septic and sewer ones, they're starting off. The Melbourne ones, they've got the lines in, but they just are now starting to hook the homeowners up. And then 11 different monitoring and respond projects that are working towards making sure those projects are working correctly and also getting information out to the public. And so you'll see over on the right here the signs that we recently put out as of July 1st. We passed an ordinance that all businesses that sell fertilizer are supposed to have these signs up. And the Lowe's over here beachside, they were very supportive of this and one of the first ones to want to be on board with that. And it basically gives the outline of what the fertilizer ordinance is and helps residents pick the correct fertilizer and make sure they're fertilizing properly, so giving that education out. And with that, we've also provided a training for the store employees, so they have a training video they can watch so that they can be more knowledgeable and help their customers pick the right fertilizer. We have 35 different projects that are under contract. So like I said, some of these projects can take a while in the permitting and design phase. And so these ones are in design now and they're getting permits, but some of them can take maybe a few months to up to 2 years, depending on the project, to get through that permitting and design. And the one you see down here, this is a rediversion that we will be doing. This is an example of one that was at the C-54 canal, but we're doing the same thing with the M1 canal in Crane Creek, where they redivert a lot of the water in the canals back towards the St. John's where it would have naturally flown. And they've been able to reduce, I think the last one with this C-54 was over 1,000 tons of nitrogen that would have been flowing out into the lagoon. So these can be very helpful too. And we have them across the gamut, so there's a lot of septic to sewer, and that's one of our longer ones to permit. The muck is also one of our longest ones to permit. So muck contracting and design and permitting can take up to 2 years on that, just because there's a lot of federal permits and things we have to go through with endangered species and other plans.
So it appeared there was muck dredging going on in O'Galley Harbor. Was that the Melbourne doing that?
Yeah, so that was actually a St. John's project. So St. John's River Water Management District was dredging the river itself. We do have an O'Galley project that will be dredging the parts out in the lagoon. So that'll be coming later. Now, we wanted to be transparent with this, so we try to give as much information as possible to the public. We have on our website what we call our dashboard, and that's where they can get a quick view of what's been going on. And so you'll see there it outlines the 17 different projects that are done, how many are under contract. It gives you how much has been spent and collected. So we have 106 million, or 109 million. It's been 106.2. It's been collected, and then we have 6.9 that's been spent. And we hear a lot, well, why haven't you spent that yet? Well, a lot of these, they're pay for performance. All of them are. We can't give them the money until they finish the project. So some will do it on a quarterly basis, and as they get phases done, they'll ask for reimbursements. But a lot of them are waiting to the end of the project to ask for reimbursements. Some of our larger ones in Melbourne, they're one that all their projects they pretty much ask for at the end. And So once they start asking for that, that number's going to jump way up. And our muck projects too, those ones aren't being reimbursed till they finish with the muck dredging, so those will start to go up too as we get more muck projects on board. And then we also keep track of the pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus that we've removed from the system so far, and that's an annual number.
If you can go back,
Yeah.
the dollars, is that the total expected?
So the total expected at the top is 486 million.
Okay, so that's what we expect to get from the half cent.
That's, yeah, initially we thought it would be about 351, but money came in a lot, faster than what we had projected. We were conservative in our projections. The state gave us projections that are actually over what we've collected, so it landed about right in the middle of what the state projected and what we projected.
I guess when I look at that and I look the left and right, suggests to me that you'll run out of money before you finish the job.
No, so it's 486 million on either side here. And this is...
Now, what I'm talking about is the pounds versus dollars.
Okay, so the pounds, that's going to go up. Some of these projects that are under construction are going to remove a lot higher amounts, and I'll show you a map here. So
Oh, okay, so that's only completed projects.
that's only completed projects.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can't count the pounds removed until they've completed the project. And so you can see it's sort of on par with what's been spent so far. But and so we have another document in our dashboard that shows you all the contracts in the plan and gives you exactly what stage they're in. So you can see who has the contract, if it started, and then we give a percentage once it has started, how much construction has been completed. And we'll also give percentages on how much has been reimbursed so far over here, how much has been requested and how much has been reimbursed. And then we just rolled out last week the story map, and we were really excited to finally get this out. And this shows all those different projects. You'll see by the size of the square how much nutrient removal each one is going to have. So the larger the square, the more nutrient removal that is there.
What's the two colors?
So it depends if it's, there's a couple different colors. So reduce, it's our different categories. So it's reducing nutrients are all the red ones. So that's the stormwater projects, things like that. The removal is the green one, so that'll be your muck projects. And then we have the restore is the purple or fuchsia ones. That's the things like the oyster projects. And then we have respond, the blue ones. Those are the ones that are testing and making sure that we're doing things properly.
Do we have any current projects in Satellite Beach going on?
I don't believe currently we are working on going out to bid with Grand Canal and the muck dredging there, so that should be coming up soon.
What are you going to do with the muck?
So it depends on the muck. So it's tested first of all to make sure there's no heavy metals or other contaminants that would make it toxic. And if it comes up with deemed as toxic, then it all has to go to the landfill and be disposed of there. And so we'd have to pay for that disposal. The landfill does take some of it now without us paying. And so what happens with the muck dredging is it gets sucked through the dredge, sometimes pumped miles through a tube to what they call a dredge material management area, which is a bermed off area that is typically lined. We try to line them when we can. We're using some older FIND sites, Florida Inland Navigation District sites. Some of those aren't lined, but we try to use a lined one when possible. So for the MIMS project, we built a lined dredge material management area. And it sits in that area to dry for a bit. Once it dries out, then they truck it out because you don't want to truck it out wet, so a lot more cost in the hauling. So it'll be used for different things. So in the muck dredging, when it goes in, it usually runs through a couple little channels, and the heavier materials like sand and clay settle out first, and then the lighter organic materials settle out next, and then the water at the end gets put over a weir and discharged back into the lagoon. And we're also doing an additional step that isn't done in most muck projects, where we do what's called interstitial water treatment. So the water that was trapped between those grains of muck gets further treatment. It gets mixed with flocculants and other things to remove more nitrogen and phosphorus, and so it moves about half of whatever nitrogen and phosphorus gets stirred up during the muck dredging project.
Do you have any idea percentage-wise what's flowing back in then from the water?
So we looking at the Turkey Creek project, we, do water testing on what's going back out, so we know how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus is flowing out. And looking at it, it was about 3% of what was removed.
Okay.
So, and I was just doing a calculation on that today, so that equates to 10 days of muck flux. So if you left that in place, 10 days worth of nutrients coming out of the muck is all that's released out of that water that's going back in. And when we add the interstitial water treatment, it actually drops that by about 50%. So it's a relatively small amount compared to the annual amount that would be leaching out if we left it in place.
Quick question. You guys have a project going on in Cocoa Beach right now?
Yes.
Big one. Is it
Yeah.
the biggest one you've done?
The muck dredging, I don't know about scale-wise, and
Because I'm asking because that retention pond is gigantic, the one that they're
so
looking to.
that one is actually very small compared to the other ones, and they've had some issues with it taking longer than they had hoped just because of delays from having to pump that out. So the one we did at Turkey Creek, that one contained all the muck at once for the whole project.
Wow.
And whereas this one, they have to pump out completely every once in a while just before they can start filling it back up with muck.
Okay. And of course, they're waiting all the time that they need for things to settle.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, no.
And so that's what slowed it down some.
You said in the beginning that, this helps, the muck dredging and all of that, but if we don't change what we're doing, it's sort of like
Yeah.
only a Band-Aid, really. And I noticed there was about $20,000 for grass clipping, public awareness, which seems relatively small in the whole budget.
And that's per year.
Per year, okay.
Yeah.
So that's
it's a
good.
5-year program. It started off actually with a higher amount the first year, so I think it's $150,000 the first year, and then it's $20,000 each additional year.
Okay, so a big push in the beginning, and
Yeah.
then some, mostly around grass clippings, but also use your fertilizer
So
wisely.
fertilizer is one of them, grass clippings, and we're doing one on septic maintenance as well.
Okay,
We had asked for a few others, but with the update, the county commission asked us to remove those. So we had taken out, there was one on stormwater pond maintenance, and then there was one on irrigation, proper irrigation.
and they asked
those
you to
ones
move
were asked to
them.
be removed.
Why was that?
They felt that they wanted to take less money towards education and put it more into active projects.
Okay, I think I heard something about this, yeah.
They also reduced our muck amounts this last year as well.
Okay.
And wanted to put more towards septic and sewer improvements.
Okay, so that was one of my follow-up questions. I think you just answered it, is in terms of like the overall picture, and we've heard from other speakers in previous meetings about, the impact of human behavior and
Yeah.
things like that. And so I suppose I was going to ask, is there a more aggressive conversation going, but I think it sounds potentially split, or at least in full debate and rolling back even some of the public education
Yeah.
on the part of the commission.
Unfortunately,
Yeah, yeah.
Now, not to say that we won't be able to put things in later. Like I said, it's a plan in flux, so every year we do an update, and if attitudes change, we might be able to add those things back in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. But, so if you check out the story map, this not only has all the projects, but it does breakdowns. You can look at each individual category, so look at stormwater and septic and muck and see the breakdowns there. You might have to advance me there.
Sorry.
You're changing it over here.
I think I used the laser pointer too much. You just hit the arrow, shouldn't it?
There you go.
Yeah. Maybe? Or we froze?
Do that.
It's just such a great
Russian
flag.
interference.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks. All right. So the other thing we just recently rolled out is the Lagoon Loyal Program. And this is part of that education to get information out to the public on behaviors they can do, like reducing their grass clippings and proper fertilizer use. And what it's going to be is a rewards system. So right now, they're working on enrolling different businesses. They have 30 different businesses enrolled already. And those businesses will offer coupons to the residents who participate in different activities. So if they buy a lagoon-friendly fertilizer at the right time of year, they upload their receipt, and then they'll get points for that. If they show that they, bought a rain barrel and show the receipts from that, that can then get them points. And different activities that they do will earn them points, and then they can redeem those for coupons that they can reimburse at various businesses around the community.
Your marketing firm's here in Satellite Beach, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, MTN.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they've done some beautiful work for us. You'll probably see some of these billboards up around too. I've seen them on the highway already. So the Let's Be Clear. And, it has two different messages to it. So let's be clear as in we want to be frank with you and get the information across. And also let's be clear as in we want to clear up the lagoon. So there'll be different billboards that we'll be rolling out with that, with information. And they have information for the public on there currently until they open up the larger portion of the website that will have all the actions that they can do. But there's a section that has all the different lagoon-friendly fertilizers that we know of. Of course, we obviously can't get them all, and there's an area for people to submit ones too if they find one that's not on the list that does meet the fertilizer ordinances. And so that website will be developing, and the full launch, they're looking at around October to have it fully developed. But right now, sort of the building of the businesses and getting people enrolled. And we're trying to get the information out there on what people can do. So, there's a lot of various things that homeowners can do on their own to help improve the lagoon, making sure they're fertilizing properly, keeping their grass clippings under control. Irrigation's a big thing too, because if you're watering more than you should, then you're allowing that into the runoff, and it's adding nutrients out into the lagoon. So conserving water and only watering when you need to, making sure your irrigation's pointed in the right spots, not out into the street or in your driveway. And there's new technology I saw. Actually, we had a speaker at one of our Citizen Oversight Committee meetings. They have a smart sprinkler now that you can actually map out the footprint of where it sprays. So put it in the center of the lawn, and it'll water and change the pressure in the sprinkler just to go follow an exact footprint. So there's some really cool stuff going on out there. And, a rain barrel is an easy way to reduce your stormwater and keep it from going down into the lagoon, and then you can use that to water your plants. If you have septic tanks, making sure that they're not only pumped out, but inspected, and that's a big thing. A lot of people do the pump out, but not realize that they also have to have them inspected and make sure there's not cracks or other damage in your drain field and things that will be causing issues later. Picking up after your pets, cleaning your cars at a commercial car wash instead of washing it in your driveway and letting the phosphates from the soap get out in the lagoon. And volunteering, and there's lots of activities we try to post in our monthly updates. So we have a monthly progress report that we put out on our website and is given to our Citizen Oversight Committee, and we try to talk about all the different volunteer opportunities coming up. So there's Restore Our Shores through Brevard Zoo. They do a lot of the oyster work out there, and also some of the shoreline vegetation like mangrove plantings. So they have a couple different things coming up in the next month throughout August. And then Keep Brevard Beautiful, a lot of their cleanups are on the beach, so it's not directly affecting the lagoon, but they do a few lagoon-related ones throughout the year. So they have their summer cleanup series. They just had one on the 13th, and their next one is July 27th, where they get people out in kayaks and other things to try to help clean up the lagoon. And then MRC has a lot of activities going on. We just had a long list on there. They just finished a bunch of different ones, but their next big one is coming up in September with the International Coastal Cleanup.
My kids and I recently did the oyster thing with the Restore Our Shores. And what's so interesting about it, which I love about the public education, is they did a really good job about, education. It just sort of, as you go along the way, essentially what we did, if folks don't know, is we got our boots on and went into the lagoon and pulled out the oyster beds and measured them and just learned a lot along the way about, that there's really no wild oysters, and that, how do we measure growth? You have to sort of commit a few hours, but I think somehow the more for that to go viral.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's ways even for us to contribute to that kind of enthusiasm about the experience, I think is great.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah, so the oysters, for those who don't know, you may have heard the oyster mats that they were doing up in Mosquito Lagoon. We do it a little different down here because we're building more of a reef, and it's in deeper water, so the mats wouldn't work out. So what they do is they have bags that they fill with oyster shells, and they get from shucking houses and other commercial places. So that's the empty shells. They fill the bags with that, stack them up, and then the top layers, they'll seed it with gardened oysters. So there's over 1,000 oyster gardeners throughout the county growing oysters off of their docks. Once they're large enough, they bring those gardened oysters in, put them into those bags, and they put 25 in each bag just to sort of seed those bags. And we're doing that because the natural oysters in most of the areas in this area of the lagoon have disappeared. We used to have a lot of oysters actually down here historically, and we found an article that was in the newspaper in the 60s showing conflict between some teenagers and the residents in Ogallie, that they were hauling out all of the oysters around the homes in Ogallie and bringing it down to Grant to a seafood house and planting the oysters out there so the seafood house could harvest them easily off of their property. And the picture in the paper showed 80 bushels of oysters that had just been collected that one day in Ogallie and were being trucked down. And they had been doing this for multiple weeks, bringing stuff down. So they were here historically. We've just wiped out a lot of those natural populations. But through the oyster gardening and now seeding these oysters, we're seeing natural recruitment now, and we're really excited about that. So on our lab, we just got a monitoring report and one of our 9-month monitoring reports. So they started off with 25 oysters in each bag, and now the bags in those areas have recruited, I think one of them was like 260 oysters in that bag. And the other ones, I think the lowest was about 50. So they're, when I looked at the overall percentage, it was about a 230% increase in the amount of oysters that have recruited since
these are
we put
huge
those in place.
bags. And what we did was we basically had calipers. We're measuring how big they've grown. But what I found interesting was, like, I've been eating oysters for a long time, and I found I had no idea how to even determine what I was looking at. And so you have to really train your eye to know what's, just a shell, what's a different, it's just an interesting process that I think, yeah.
Can I ask you something? What's your opinion on oysters versus clams?
So the reason we chose oysters over clams was there's additional benefits that the oysters provide that clams don't. So, and also clams don't deal well with the brown tide. So the brown tide that we've been experiencing, some Smithsonian did some research with that, and they found that the clams will close up and stop feeding. Whereas the oysters, they'll reduce their feeding, but they continue to feed. And they think the reduction in feeding is just because they're getting so much food from the brown tide, they're full. So they're not eating as quickly as they would. So there is that benefit in that they still will feed during those times, and so they don't stress out like the clams would. And then the other thing is that they provide structure for other organisms. So the clams are buried down in the sand. They're not going to be beneficial to other organisms hiding in those areas, and with the loss of seagrass, we can use additional structure out there. The other benefit that oysters provide that clams don't is they provide more surface area for that beneficial denitrifying bacteria to grow on. So there's natural bacteria in the sand that will remove nitrogen, change it from those nitrates and nitrites into a gas that leaves the lagoon in nitrogen gas. And there was one study that showed, they looked at bare sand, what they call culch, which is just loose oyster shells, a restored reef, and then an aquacultured set of oysters. And the restored oyster reef did better than any of those as far as the amount of nitrogen it was removing from those areas. So it was, I think it was like 27% 6% or something, is in the 20s above just bare sand, which is what, clams would basically be doing, is it would be a bare sand system. So they're providing additional nitrogen removal just by having that in there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Was the source of the oyster spat, I guess, local, or were they imported from somewhere else?
So we are required to get spat from Brevard. So what they do is they collect some live oysters from Brevard, they bring it to a hatchery, and the hatchery then breeds those oysters, collects the spat, and gives it back to us.
Mr. Smith, thanks for coming and giving us the presentation.
No problem.
It was a great presentation. There's some areas down in South Florida that do a really good job of analyzing the water on a daily basis and then providing reports to the community. St. Lucie River, for instance, has numerous sensors throughout the entire North Fork, South Fork, and out towards the inlet. And I was curious if there's a way that, or if there's even been any discussion of Brevard County getting involved with understanding independent of maybe Harbor Branch or St. Johns River, or in conjunction with them, to really know what's going on and strategically place some sensors. Turkey Creek. There's a lot of speculation and there's a lot of rumor that there's a lot of sewage, treated sewage, still going into those areas. And I would just like to hear your
So
perspective.
Orca is one of the organizations that has sensors already out in the lagoon, and they do have one, I believe, just outside of Turkey Creek is one of the sensors. I think there's 5 active currently. I'd have to verify that, but they had about double what they have currently, but through funding cuts, they took a bunch of those sensors offline. We just, in this 2019 plan update with the lagoon plan, we moved some funding around to, at the request of one of the commissioners, to add some more sensors. So we have 4 sensors that we'll be putting online in the next year. And one of those, I know, will be in the Grand Canal area to do monitoring around that dredge project and make sure, what the levels are and what, might come from that project, and see what kind of reductions we'll see afterwards. And I believe we might be putting one in Sykes Creek. I think there's one already in there, but we might put one in a different spot. And then there's 2 other locations we're going to be looking at.
So just for perspective, the St. Lucie River is significantly smaller than the lagoon is here in Brevard County.
Yeah.
And especially if you incorporate Banana River, which some people would pull the 2 apart. And the number of sensors going on, say, in the St. Lucie River is tremendously high. It's certainly not 4, and it's not relying on an organization like Orca per se to be cognizant of how healthy their water systems are, their river systems down there. And it just seems, kind of logical that where we maybe want to start is understanding the health of the lagoon on a daily basis, and then developing projects, afterwards. I'd love to see, more transparency there.
Yeah, I mean, we would like to get more sensors and things too, and we're looking constantly for funding for things like that, and we're applying for grants and other things that we can expand upon, projects in the plan. And
We got 400 mil, don't we?
yeah, but all of that is actually already slated. If you look in the plan, every bit of dollar is connected to a project.
Yeah.
So anything that we move to somewhere else, we have to take off of something that's already slated. And while the monitoring is nice, it's not removing nutrients. And our focus is to remove those nutrients, get them out of the system. So we're trying to focus more on that. And we hear from people all the time, even on the things that we are doing monitoring on. Why are you doing more studies?
Well, we got to be careful on the Turkey Creek project. If you look at the report that was developed by Dr. Treffery, 85% of what was removed was silica, quartz, clay, which are, all 3 of those are inert. And then when you break down the 15%, the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen was the was just fractions of what was actually removed
Yeah.
in terms
And
of the analysis. So
that is
we-
with most of the muck. I mean, you're seeing those similar percentages of the organics and the silicon, clay, things like that. However, the amount of nutrients actually coming out of that muck is the largest contributor of nutrients in the lagoon. So I think it's around 31% when we recently recalculated it, is directly related to just release from muck and that legacy load that's out there. So while the organic component might be a small percentage of the solids in there, it's still releasing a fair amount of nitrogen and phosphorus into the system. And like I said before, we found less muck out in there when we started doing our ground truthing surveys, but we found that the concentration of nutrients was higher and it was releasing more nutrients than we initially expected it to. So, and we had, it was 100 million that just got cut from the muck, so we had more looking into that, or budgeted for that before.
Are you aware of the aeration project that was going on here?
Yes.
Have you seen any of the results from that?
So they're going into a second phase in it, so they're trying another aeration system. We had a company that approached us and wanted to, it was Oxolve is the name of the company, and they have a different system. So they were using just sort of aerators to introduce nanobubbles, and from the preliminary reports, it wasn't performing to the level that they had expected, and they weren't seeing the reductions they were hoping to in that study. So they're hoping with this new technology that instead of using these microbubbles, what it does, it takes water out of the system, infuses it directly with O2. So they have straight O2 being diffused into the water and then pumped back out.
Where will that be taking place?
I don't think they were going to use the same canal. They were looking at a nearby canal, though.
Here in Satellite?
I believe so. I haven't heard if they've solidified that, but when they were talking about it before, they were trying to stay within, close proximity to the initial test site.
Very good. Thanks again.
Yep.
Quick question about the data that you're interested in. How can we view that data? I understand that you have to be a specialist to understand it and everything, but how often is that data put out for the public to see?
So some of these studies are Florida Tech. They are the ones holding that data on some of these projects. So the aeration project isn't one that's directly connected with our program, but they share some of that data with us. So once they tell us we can release it, then we are able to share that with the public. So it's up to them to, some of it's, they're waiting for it to be published in a peer-reviewed journal or something like that, and so they don't want to release that data before then.
Okay, so we couldn't call Orca and be like, hey.
Well, Orca, they should be able to provide, their sensors, those sensors are online. You can watch live as the sensors move on there. Yep. In fact, we watch them constantly for the dissolved oxygen when we're worried about fish kills and that, so we'll make sure we keep an eye on those sensors to try to get ahead of something like that.
Well, don't want to let you go too quickly.
Yeah.
But I saw something that we've been talking about were those fertilizer flyers, the ones that you put in Lowe's, and because we have Ace Hardware coming up, they could be one. We were talking about doing a flyer similar to that, even though we're kind of more on the lines of no fertilizer at all.
Yeah, so ours is actually a solid sign that is permanently posted in the retail space. So it's not a flyer. It's anywhere where they sell fertilizer, they're supposed to post that. So whether it's at the rack, but if they have an end cap away from the rack, then they have to have another one there. So some of our stores have multiple signs that we've given them just to cover all their areas.
Do we have a copy of that same sign?
One they use?
Yeah.
No.
We can send it.
Through the company, so we don't have a copy of that.
Yeah, but we can share it with you
That's
guys.
something that we were interested in doing here. Just making a sign like that.
We do have the Florida Now campaign and business fertilizer information from Melbourne and the county that we could give out at events.
Sure. But we last time we were here, we were talking about making a sign or a flyer or something to educate people on this.
Yeah.
So that'd be great.
Yeah, and so
Something that was maybe more, a little bit goes farther, perhaps even, just in talking about, reducing fertilizer.
so
use.
ours covers the general ordinance, and
Right.
cities can opt to opt out of having the signs as long as they are implementing their own thing. So you guys, if you want to put something that's more strict out and have that in place, and you change your ordinance to have it a stricter ordinance, then you could opt out of having those signs and put your own up if you wanted. That's an option in that ordinance.
All right, I think we answered all the questions that I had penciled down.
Okay.
Between all of us, so thank you very much. Oh, any further public comment this time? No? All right, thank you so much,
Thanks.
Brennan.
Thank you for your time very much.
This is
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
All right, next order of business. Any board member comments? Oh, Nick. Sure, put your hand up. We have a staff update we need. Thank you, Brennan.
Hi, Board. Thanks so much. Staff update for this month. Completed projects on Thursday the 27th. Completed our sustainability workshop number 17. I had a great turnout for that event. That one was on Florida native plants. Had about 20 people show up for that one. The next thing completed was the DEP stormwater application for stewardship. The SEAS program received its final reimbursement funding check. So that project is completed, and that was for our stormwater education. And I'll continue to do stormwater education, but we'll just be using that material created through the grant in the foreseeable future, as well as material created in-house as well. Work underway this month includes, we continued planting as part of the NEP program. We had a volunteer that I worked with to plant over 500 Spartina grasses and 2 pond apples in our stormwater ponds just north of the DeSoto project and north of the Satellite Beach Library. That is continuing and will continue for the foreseeable future until that one is completed in 2020. We did continue testing our natural alternatives to Roundup at the garden area, and Miramichi is still in the lead as the one that is most cost effective and beneficial for replacing glyphosate. I presented to the Eco Verde School as well on 7/12. And that was a lot of fun. Got to talk with the kids and educate them a little bit about the environment and sustainability and how they can begin to become stewards of their environment. Also did a budget review with City Council on the 17th. Worked with Public Works on the aquatic systems incorporated to manage the DeSoto Pond. So you'll be seeing some new work out there with some aeration to reduce the amount of algae and growth inside the pond area, as well as we're going to put some carp in there to help manage some of the vegetation. Some of the public events and meetings, there was the Brevard Sustainability Working Group at 9 a.m. Actually, that's a typo, should say July 22nd, because we're in the month of July. It's my fault. Really good. We actually came up with our mission statement and our vision. It was a really good meeting. They're going to type that up and send it to me with the final language, and I can present that at the next meeting. Again, those meetings are open, and you're welcome to attend those. We will be hosting the solar workshop in October through that with the Brevard Sustainability Working Group, and they did also offer to host the next Sustainability Summit, since we haven't had one since the first, and they offered to do one again in February of next year. They would host, and we talked with other cities about potentially hosting, and actually Brevard Sustainability Work hosting seems like a pretty good idea. That way it's another entity that can take on that role as educating other boards as well, so that we as a board don't have to educate other boards. This organization could actually step in and help do that. That was a really nice turnout from that event. And again, that was on the 22nd
You
of
did a
July.
summit, is that regional, statewide?
So the first one that we did was Brevard County, it was across the hall, and it was all the boards and some of the leaders of the community members, and also city manager.
From Orlando.
Orlando did come, Chris Castro did come to present at that one, that was really good.
Yeah.
And so we might have another speaker of that kind of caliber to come in and talk. Saturday, July 20th, the event that Brandon was talking about that MRC had was the National Mangrove Day. It was National Mangrove Day last Saturday. So I hope you're all out there watering your mangroves and planting your mangroves. On Friday, July 19th, the Sustainability Board bike ride was held. I was unable to attend, but my bike was there, thanks to Julie. Nope. Okay. Well, either way, hey, Chris, you were there?
Yeah, I was there.
You could tell us about that
It's
later.
fun.
I was there, it was great.
Yeah, sure. Again, sorry I couldn't make it. I was dead tired. I was working on the pond all day Friday, which is why the pond has no vegetation floating in it currently, and the shorelines are
I'm gonna
clean.
need you to be there next month, though.
Okay, yes, next month. I won't be doing any hard labor on the next Friday before that one. Future topics and special presentations. The sustainability workshop that will happen tomorrow is number 18, community involvement. And it'll be held here. And we'll discuss the different community involvement opportunities for residents in the community, from PD to fire to rec to sustainability to beautification, and ways that they can be involved, who they should contact, and how it's beneficial for the community to be involved in your community. The next workshop will be number 19, and that'll be on community gardening. And again, that will be here, and that'll be on August 29th at 7 p.m. Continuing to postpone classroom presentations of stormwater because, again, school is not in session. And that also is why we aren't holding the Dolores Sustainability Board meetings or the Satellite Sustainability Board meetings that will start up as school resumes. Continuing to discuss the Earth-Friendly Community Campaign with Councilman Mindy Gibson, and it's coming along pretty well, actually, and I'll have something more to report on that once it's kind of finalized. The Brevard Sustainability Working Group's next meeting will be August 26th at 12 p.m. on August 26th. And with that, I have a quick presentation that I wanted to run by everybody because I will be presenting it at the next council meeting. I'm going to go over it pretty quickly. Just going to go over the different slides and what I'm going to talk about at the meeting. The main focus from this presentation that I wanted the board to look at are the last two slides where I've developed and gone over with the intern, Hannah, from FIT, who's been with us for the last month and a half, 2 months now. Options for our next 20 Green Achievement targets. So if you want to bring any ideas to me between now and that next meeting, feel free. I'm going to present these as just potential, not ironed out. These are just ideas to kind of get the council to think about the next 20 as we start developing the Sustainability Action Plan for the future. We need to develop the next 20 since we've already kind of started completing those. So I'm just going to real quick go over that.
What is the time frame then for this process that you think for your
It's
development?
covered here in our first slide.
Okay, great.
So, we have completed 8 out of the 20. The 20 of the 88. So there's 88 Green Achievement targets that were slated to be completed as the bulk of the Green Achievement targets for the Sustainability Action Plan itself. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to split them up, right? So the first 20 are in the first 5 years, the next 20 are in the next 5 years, and so on and so forth. We should be able to get all of them done. Some of them we might actually get additional ones done. If there's some low-hanging fruit and we can double down and get some extra ones done, that'd be really great. Always trying to accomplish more. Once the new ones are approved by council, they'll begin being implemented. With the board's direction, we can create some of those, hopefully, in the course of the next year or so. These are just a rough draft of what I've been working on. So I'm going to take a quick in-depth look at this. You know who I am. These are the department values and my job description, just real quick. You probably know all this. And some of the things that we do within the Department of Community Development, and that's why sustainability is kind of all throughout the city, but my environmental programs coordinator position was pushed into the Community Development Department to help deal with even the little things like code issues that we can resolve through education of stormwater as opposed to, running somebody a citation or something like that. So there's educational ways to kind of accomplish some of our goals. Some of the goals, however, are more concrete. One of them is the solar, which is not currently producing power above our heads, but when it does, we produce sometimes enough power to actually negate our total usage. We did so in the last 3 months. However, we do have to pay the fee to use the power. So there's that fee that is actually pretty expensive. So getting from total cost zero is different than net zero for usage. Some of the months are different. What I have are some of the numbers that we've been experiencing since the installation, and we are aiming for saving 7,000. So far, we've saved 3,500. We're projected to save around 6 within the first total year. We did install it in October 8th of last year, so it's done until October 8th, and we'll actually get a full year's worth of data. However, you're more than welcome to view the screen out front in the lobby to get any of that data anytime. Basically, some of the numbers are that we have saved, that's not right, we've saved over 70 tons of carbon emissions since installation in October, and we have saved over, I think it's over 90 now, since I did this slide, it's more and more every day, 90 kilowatt hours of energy through our 222 solar panels on the roof of this building. Since we did one solar program, of course, we were recognized, and FDL did another solar program with us, putting the 10 or so panels up at the Pelican Park for the 25 kWs of the solar canopy out there. Of course, we'll talk about that as the first solar concert. This power was generated by the panel, went back to the grid, then we pulled from the grid, so we probably didn't use any actual power, used clean power for the concert. That's what the panels look like here. Really pretty. Thanks, Dylan. Or Dylan's on here, but thanks, Dylan, for the photo. And again, thanks, Dylan, for the photo for the carport and solar canopy at Pelican Park. Community garden, thank you all for your support in that. That's been going really well. We rented 36 beds, and we actually brought in over $4,000 in donations of organic heirloom seeds, which we gave back to the community at almost all of our events. At Founders Day, the mayor and staff were just handing them out to people. It was really great. We're going to continue working on that, and that's going to lead us to our composting green achievement target in the future. Really great fun building that and sharing with everybody there. And thank you to Roman Vigliani for helping kick that off and be a part of creating that green achievement target. It's been a lot of fun. It does require constant maintenance, as those of you with beds know. So after the summer's gone, we'll be doing a work day out there, probably after the next workshop, community gardening. So we'll talk more about that next month. Electric vehicle has been very successful, and the charging stations are without a doubt helping. I use one every day for my personal use, and I pay 15 cents a kilowatt hour to do that. And with that, the city has received $525 in revenue from the charging stations themselves since June 2019, as of June 2019. And the city itself doesn't pay for this, of course, for their own charging of the electric vehicle. However, we do pay for the power that does go there. So, when I want to charge the city car, just swipe the card and that works. We have saved the city car, to the city vault, $355 by not using gas. We do use some gas when we travel to different locations, but as those of you that have driven the car know, it has about 40 miles worth of electric battery, and then once the battery is depleted, it switches to gas, about 300 miles worth of gas. So you can drive to Miami, you just have to use both. Once you get there, you can charge up and drive around town. So we are, this year, saving $137. Hopefully we'll save more. And that just is remembering to charge the car. Remember to charge the car. It's very important. If you don't charge it, you don't save any money. The workshops are going really, really well. With some help, we're kind of developing a better signage sheet system to determine who is interested in what, and we can track those numbers. Overall, we've had over 100 different people visit and attend these workshops. Some of you have been there. Thank you for that. Those are the workshops. Right now we're here on community involvement. We will then go gardening, climate change 101, invasive species, and solar and peace review. Because at the end of the year we'll have the numbers for a year's worth of solar, which is why we'll do that in November, December. Going to events is always great. While we're there, we're implementing these new ordinances, 1129 and 1002. Plastic straw, recommended reduction for businesses and restaurants. We're not banning anything, we're just recommending some good behavior in 1002. And in 129, we're saying that anyone that is a vendor at an event cannot use styrofoam or single-use plastic. They sign a contract with REC, it's right there in black and white. While I'm at the event, I'll go around and talk to everybody and make sure that they're on their best behavior. Green teams is something that we're going to institute within the city now, just approved through the resolution that was passed last council. And that is going to allow us to move towards reducing our plastic use as the city itself, which is going to be really great. We're going to do that through creating a green team. My team will be on the green team. We'll have a number of other staff members on the green team helping with that. Dark sky certification, you all know that really well. I'm going to go over this again. This is all for council's sake. We're going to talk about how we changed that to starry skies and made it more applicable to an urban environment, because we don't own the streetlights on A1A. We can't actually get the dark skies designation. FPL owns those. That wouldn't allow us to actually get that. We can't change FPL's lighting which they just installed. We can, however, create starry skies, and we're going to do that within the city and then lead by example. Leading by example brings us to our beach cleanups, which have been ongoing with KBB and will continue. We promote them on our Facebook page, and even Dominic Montanaro has reached out to the individual Shota families. I think that all their work in that. We did install some new signage to help with that, and there will be another installation that will go near these in the near future with Reach One Millennial School will present at the 21st meeting.
And I want to just not to jump in, but the fact that they're doing the workshop at 5, there'll still be a normal council meeting.
Yeah, still be a normal
They're
council
on the
meeting.
agenda.
And I wrote something up for Courtney. She can put it either as an agenda item or in her city manager report. It's up to her.
Okay.
She'll talk with you, Julie will work with you to figure that out.
Cool.
The NEP program grant that I wrote that was funding the bioswale, and that is still ongoing. The DEP portion of that, like I mentioned, the funding is finished. That was for the educational outreach that coincided with this project. We'll be doing more plantings, hopefully when it's not so hot out. The one that we did do was very successful, and we're still doing more and more, some of it more slowly with volunteers and focused, like I mentioned, the 500 grasses that were planted on the south side of the western stormwater pond on the way to the library, as well as 2 pond apples donated from John Fergus. Thank you, John. It looks like this. It doesn't quite look like that now. I'm going to do some maintenance in the summer. As we all know, summer grass grows very fast. So I'll be out there again with the weed whacker soon, working with Public Works to make sure it looks good. Those are the ones we completed. Ones underway include xeriscaping, like we started out in front of City Hall, and we're going to continue to do it in municipal facilities to reduce our use of maintenance. So if we can get away from some of that, we can plant more natives, that'd be great. We'll be doing that here at City Hall, PD, and other locations, and definitely at the new location of Fire and Public Works off of Jackson. When we do create this building, we'll be looking at LEED equivalent certification as a way to build those buildings. We'll be hitting one of those green achievement targets while adapting to sea level rise and becoming resilient. In order to do that, we did create some ordinances, and Courtney knows this a lot better than I do, and she'll talk to you about these greater detail and has already to the council and to the community, but these have helped to kind of pave the way. She mentioned the one earlier about the CCCL, moving setbacks back to reduce the impacts of, storm surge on homes that are oceanfront, and also to become more resilient. And that's going to be discussed at that meeting at 5 in detail for this particular green achievement target. So when I give this presentation, they will have just seen that whole presentation, so I don't have to go over that in great detail. They've already done that. Complete streets, Jackson Avenue is something that's being worked on, and what we do complete street. It's going to be renovated, and storm wall will be installed, and sidewalks will be nicer, and be vegetated, and be more biking centric, and that's what makes a complete street a complete street. That works with FDOT for other things, in addition to the budget on A1A, that also adds to that as well. So we have that. We have a program that, again, anyone that knows anyone that lives on the lagoon itself that wants a grant for $500 can get one with the city for a 1-to-1 match to create a bioswale or living shoreline on their property. It's been ongoing. It's on the website. Haven't gotten a lot of traffic. I need to get 3 people to do this by the end of the year. Just hint that with me. I'm talking with this again to the council, and I'll talk to them in more detail. Composting, it's starting after the next workshop for community involvement, the gardening one. I'll probably do another workshop specifically about this in August, just on composting, where we're going to give away some of the composters that you all saw at the Earth Day event. And we're going to give them away if people pay $30 to do the workshop. We're going to figure out the details with that, and it should be really great as a way to kind of redo the Greenworks Orlando program here in Satellite Beach. It's the same composters they use. They donate them to us, and we're going to repurpose them for our community. LEED buildings and LED lighting go hand in hand, so we'll be converting to LED lighting in different municipal facilities, hopefully through the ADM contract. And I can tell you more about that as that contract gets completed, which isn't fully completed yet, so. The last thing is, we're trying to get more solar, so thank you, Steve, for your help with that. And the more business we can have to come talk to me about solar, the better. We're going to try to get those going. And those reviews for buildings and LEED buildings, those are going to be something that we're going to be continuing to do as we build new buildings in the future. And that comes from a review. Last but not least, the next NEP grant, that, as I mentioned, was partially funded, includes the Simpsons Island project, where we're doing clams, oysters, and seagrasses once we get the additional $30,000, hopefully from NEP, possibly from the county. And we are going to change this one a little bit. This one is testing and tracking synthetic fertilizer. We're going to actually adjust this to go bigger. Matt, I think you're really interested in this one. And after talking with Courtney about it, we're probably going to reach out to try to make this a little bit bigger so that the study is very valid as opposed to doing it too small and not getting really good data. You might want to go a little bit bigger so we need better funding to do more detailed monitoring. Because if we just did it ourselves, we might not get the best possible data for the juice for the squeeze. So the suggested gaps. First is the one from Between Millennials. More eco art could be a nice one. Creating a green team, we're already doing that. And the sustainability bike ride, maybe there's a way where we can kind of fold some of these things into the next green achievement targets for the future. Just some ideas there. And then improving outdoor air quality, improving indoor air quality. The amount for reducing the total amount of municipal water use. Is there a way we can reduce our water usage? Local businesses diversity. Do we want to diversify the types of businesses? Is that something that can lead to sustainability? Promoting and increasing the number of lagoon-friendly lawns. We are already the #1 LFL in KBP's list with more gold certifications than anyone else. Maybe we'll want to try to step up that game and promote that program more. Assess the number of homes with solar and increase that number. Is that something we want to do? Preserve the acres of habitat. Kind of hard to do. We've already preserved a lot in South Beach, but that might be worth talking about. Educating residents about category 1 invasives. That to me is really important. Removing a number of acres of muck. We're kind of already doing that again, so we might want to create these green achievement targets so that the things we do get recognized as a green achievement target. Account for reduced municipal energy consumption as a whole. That falls kind of in line with the Ready 100 that you all supported last meeting. Installing a certain number of gardens in the schools and compost stations. Assessing the annual CO2 emissions. Currently working on that with Hannah Best, our intern, to do a little audit of our emissions and our carbon footprint. So again, some of these things are things we can be doing and create achievements for. The number of sustainable education programs. Do we want to increase a certain amount of programs and create some programs for that? Do we want to reduce light pollution? Do we want to do redevelopment of the website to include travel and Space Area Transit to be more travel friendly? Because travel is one of those things that impacts the carbon footprint based on how we travel. Create cigarette fund collection. Actually, already put a item in motion with the council, and they approved applying for 30 cigarette containers from Keep America Beautiful, which we're going to get for free. And we have locations around the city where we're going to put those. So we might work with a collection program with that to collect X number of pounds of the cigarette waste. Review and revise some codes to improve efficiency standards. Increase the amount of lagoon shoreline with mangrove plantings by X%. We're kind of already doing that one. I just really want to put that on my bit to remind everybody to see if they're paying attention. And then, where possible and feasible, encourage the use of electric lawn care equipment. So instead of using gas-powered mowers and blowers, maybe there's an alternative to that. Or rake works really well.
Electric mower.
Or goat, you can just get goats. Increase attendance and outreach at events. Do we want to try to get more people to show up to events and kind of make that a goal? So those are just some things that I've been thinking of as ways to, work on becoming more sustainable for our next set of 20. We're going to have to create another set at the end of our first 5 years, and we're about 2.5 years in, so I figured now is a good time for this conversation. Don't have to make any decisions now, but if everybody wants to kind of think about this and bring it up to the next meeting, we can kind of talk more, and this is just a boilerplate, get started, blueprint for the future. So this is what we'll present at the 7th meeting. Thank you all very much. I'll close with that.
Okay, we should definitely make that an action item for the next meeting.
I do have one thought. Can we put a parking lot? I know it's late and everything. It's just thinking about sort of the cross-pollination, the cross-purpose of some of these that I've seen just right off the bat in terms of bringing an educational situation to a bike ride. And so we're all kind of biking and also maybe meeting at Long Doggers to have a workshop on oysters or just, that kind of cross, just to get the brainstorming. Yeah.
At the Tuesday run, I
Right.
remember Tuesday, they had a big oyster RV there.
Yeah.
And apparently this
Yeah.
family, they drive around town, they have a county grant or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's in conjunction with Long Doggers. So they're going from Long Doggers to Long Doggers with their RV.
Yeah.
They put all the mats out with the drills and everything, and it gets a bunch of people in there, and they're all drilling and so
Yeah.
forth. So
Yeah.
They just had an event like last Tuesday doing something like that, which is pretty interesting.
And I would like and I'm just saying this not to like state it all now, but just as like creative juices for next time. The biking thing, I think, has a lot of potential. I'm looking straight at you, but basically in terms of, like, in my mind, Florida's bike city is kind of what I think in terms of like what Satellite Beach could be. So I just in terms of how you create these situations for, to what kind of infrastructure, what kind of like just sort of education and engagement with the public and events and things like that. But there's so many possibilities within that align.
So maybe we could talk about creating a bike path down the center of Satellite Beach. I mean,
That'd be awesome.
we have some space. If you go Kale all the way down, there's probably a little room for a bike lane.
Right. Just
Thanks,
brainstorm.
Jennifer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. All right, any public comment? Any further public comment? No? Yep.
Quickly, I know you want to get out of here. I thank you for what you're doing. I don't get it very often, but I appreciate all what you're doing. You have to catch up. To be honest, you brought the council, so it's good to hear about that, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, any further public comment? No? All right, next order of business, board member comments.
I just want to update, I did reach out to my homeschool groups about youth presentations. So Levi is available in late August, or for this meeting in August,
Levi?
if we wanted to start it. And the other homeschool folks are excited. So I know we want to reach out to schools, but, because it's kind of hard to get that communication going right away. If we still want to move forward, people are interested.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, along those lines, I really do need to get with Nick about firming something up. I know we wanted to make some rules and guidelines and so forth to make that for the youth presentations that we were talking about doing. So I don't know if we can set a date where we can actually just iron all that out, but that'd be great to do.
You want to do it this month or before next meeting?
I mean, even this month would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, before the end of this month would be great. We got 10 more days in the month.
Tomorrow?
What time, 3?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
So are there any board members that are concerned about the hydrofluorosilicic acid issue?
I don't mind her information personally. I think it's a good way for her to let out what she needs to let out.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was just curious if there's any concerns, because if there is, maybe we should invite somebody from utilities to come in and talk about what that is. But if, I don't want to drag these meetings out any longer than they need to be dragged out. So I just was curious if there's any concerns with boards. Maybe we should invite somebody to come in and help us see the other side of what her concerns are. Her original presentation was filled with a bunch of holes, and the way that the whole thing was brought to us was a little interesting, to say the least. And but if there's no concern with the board, then that's cool.
Well, I'd prefer to see it go away, but that's just a personal preference.
How would you make it go away?
That's the point. You've got to change the utility, and that ain't going to work. It's not worth it to me to ride that horse.
Oh, I thought you were talking about make her presentations or her coming here, Bill. I think we have to open the floor to her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think she's concerned about it. She's sincerely concerned about it, whether she's right or wrong. So I certainly think that it's good from free speech standpoint for her to be able to come share the information and everything else. I feel like there's enough issues regarding which there is consensus that we can work together on. Is kind of my view on it.
Yeah, don't misconstrue. I'm not opposed to what she's doing. What I'm saying is I just assumed that she was successful and they stopped putting the stuff in the water. But I don't have the time to mess with it. I did talk to or communicate with the folks in Harbor about golf carts. Last year, their council met and decided they would only allow the state-licensed low-speed vehicles. In other words, they do not want to talk about the locally licensed golf carts. So that's going nowhere.
I got something real quick. It won't take long, but I got a solar company to give me a breakdown of a commercial project and how the financials broke down. Thought you guys would be interested to just take it with you and look at. It was about double the size of the City Hall installation, and they got 100% ROI after 6.2 years. And you can read it over. This is assuming that they paid cash for the system and didn't finance any of the system. Big savings over time, over $1 million in 25 years. But I'm going to try to put something together for next time for residential, and let you look at the numbers for that kind of and talk it over.
Thanks, Steve. Let's discuss this next time around once everyone's had a chance to digest it.
Next agenda.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, there's one last thing. I had a question from the last month's minutes. We talked about a tiered system. I couldn't remember exactly what we were talking about tiering. Remember that?
Yeah, so there's so much going on in terms of, different factors in lagoon health. How do we integrate that? How do we assimilate all of that into priorities? And so we talked about creating like tiered priorities of this sustainability board. So given that there are a number of issues, as we heard today, that contribute to the same challenges, what do we all think? Taking it all into consideration would be the tiered approach. It's not that one thing is important and another one isn't. But what do we think is the top tier? What do we think is the secondary tier? Maybe how that aligns with the GATS. And so at the end of last meeting, we just basically said, actually, I think maybe you and Nick were going to just talk language. But, I can also
That's
think
something
about.
I think we should get moving, and that was a great idea. I remember that. So, how can we communicate over this next month to actually make something out of that? How can we do that with the sunshine laws and all that? That's what I'm asking.
Right, and I think it's sort of trying to assimilate all of that information. So one of us could, as you said, start the process with coming up with some language that maybe we could respond to. When we make a motion, that's kind of how one member does it. So you were going to go offline with Nick, but I'd be happy to as well. Just kind of draft some language that says what might tiers of priorities look like, given everything that we've discussed as a board. And I'm the newest member here, but what I've heard. And then what are some of the questions that still remain in terms of how this board sort of coalesces its priorities? But some of the members who have been here longer Do you have thoughts on that in terms of moving forward? There's so much information that we work with.
Jennifer, if you'd like to meet tomorrow at 4?
I think that would work.
But then once you discuss this with her, I can't discuss the same thing. We can't brainstorm.
No.
No, let me explain your options here. You can send emails, you just can't really reply to them privately. You can send her your thoughts anytime, and you can send them through me to her, doesn't matter. You can have a workshop where you can discuss anything you want and then bring it back to the board and then make motions on it. I know you're leaving town soon, so I don't know how that works out for you. But,
Could we create a workshop for tomorrow? That's the thing. Yeah.
I'm not gonna be here tomorrow,
Well, and I do think it's
and we'll have to publicly
Okay.
post it.
yeah, and you can get to a point of, absurdity, sometimes with sunshine laws, but I do think there's a purpose, which is, we're the board, we should be discussing things together, but at the same, and this is more, I guess, procedural and substantive. I think that all the presentations we've had, it's great, because I do feel like, I've like both of the ones tonight where I feel like I've learned a ton, and my brain's going in 1,000 different points, which I'm trying to keep to myself, because I know everyone wants to sleep or eat or do things like that. But, so I think we should think in terms of our structure about time we're allotting for the presentations, and then factoring in following up on them with recency, because, you know what I mean, we still, I feel like, have a lot of unfinished business about all the stuff we heard about the lagoon. I'm having all kinds of thoughts now about, city planning that we just learned about from Courtney. So I think adding in the informational piece for us is huge and awesome, and I'm really excited about going to these meetings and learning all about it. Increasingly, I feel like with each one, but it's important for us to have the time as a board to say, okay, what are we going to take and do with this information, so we're not just being passively informed to be more interesting at cocktail parties. I'm kidding, but you know what I'm saying?
Well, to that, can we make the next meeting kind of a workshop? Can we do that?
I think you can, yeah.
Or at least allot time, so maybe we only have one presentation in a meeting and say this is going to be allotted workshop time when we're all together at our
Believe it
designated
or
time.
not, I do try to do that.
No, but I mean, next meeting, we could essentially just do a staff update and start ironing out some ideas and so forth. We could do a few things and just, for the 2 hours that we're here after that, try to iron out some ideas.
Does that mean we can ban public comment? We can ban
Banning.
Wasn't a lot of public comment, it's you guys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ban all that stuff?
Here's what you can do, you can send me all your thoughts, and I can put them in the packet.
There you go.
guys can
There you
review before the meeting.
No, it's great, man. I tell people all the time, like, it's everyone's
Sounds like
it's
a
a very
plan.
contemplative group, and we're very collegial, but we need to have, I think, to take what have we learned and what do we want to do with it,
I think the problem is, we're all busy with our jobs and so forth in lives. We don't have all the time in the world to do this outside research. I think it'd be great if we could get together at the time that we have allotted monthly
Right. What would,
over some things.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think what might be helpful too, it's like homework for us, is have a deadline to send to Julie, and maybe there's two things, which is, what do you think is your list of priorities, not ranked, just list of priorities, and what are your questions at this point? I'm just trying to make it simple. There's other things that we could assign ourselves, but, and then maybe a week in advance, or, I don't know, just trying to give people enough time. Something like that, that's easy. That doesn't require a lot of additional research, but some thought, and then we could organize
Be
them.
discussed.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. Next month, I don't think, maybe we shouldn't have any presentations at all, except for the child's presentation, if we do that.
Well, and I love the presentations, I'm just trying to find time to have,
Sort through some of this.
both,
That's a
yeah.
good solution,
Yeah.
Chris. I mean, if you guys want to even start it 30 minutes earlier too, you can certainly do that.
That's true.
Oh, I'm not going to be here next month. Let's not do that to Grace, sorry.
What's that?
I'm not going to be here next month, let's not do that to Grace.
It wouldn't be that difficult. It'd be less for work for her.
Well, if you're not going to be here, you can suggest we start 2 hours early.
That's right.
Doors open.
It's the perfect time.
It would be,
Yeah.
I think it would be less work for her. We'll have less action items on our list here, and,
Whatever you want.
so do we need a motion or something?
No, just tell me what you want.
Change the time or just making the agenda?
The agenda to,
Oh, yeah.
more of a workshop type agenda.
Yeah.
I think that'd be good. We've learned a lot, and then one of the things we can talk about is pacing stuff for moving forward. That can be a, internal workshop as well as external,
Okay.
You can talk till you guys are blue.
All right.
I'll tell you all about it.
Maybe we can include our public audience, since it's so grand, we can include them.
It probably needs some structure to that. I'm just recommending.
I don't know if anyone's going to be here, but,
It's got to go.
Yeah, right.
All right, so, all right, any further public comment? All right. All right, so next order of business. Agenda items for the next meeting, we did that. Adoption of minutes for June 26, 2019.
Second.
I'm sorry. Mark moved?
Yeah.
I didn't see.
Second.
Okay. David Gliotti?
Yes.
Matt White?
Yes.
Jennifer Schroeder?
Yes.
John Fergus?
Yes.
Mark Boyd?
Yes.
Chris Reed? Motion
Yes.
carries.
All right, and that's the adjournment of the meeting, thank you.